He was just the quiet man who delivered pizzas to their law office, invisible to the attorneys who barely acknowledged his presence. But when the mob lawyer made veiled threats against Sarah's family, her father's response was so precise and chilling that the criminal defense attorney went pale and whispered, "Who the hell is your father?" Welcome to Interesting Human Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden identity, protection, and the guardians who watch over us in silence, tell me in the comments, from which city are you watching this video today? And if you believe that true protectors often work unseen, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. The fluorescent lights of Romano's Pizza cast harsh shadows across the prep station where Vincent Corelli rolled dough with the same methodical precision he applied to everything in his life. At 53, he had perfected the art of blending into the background, just another working-class guy in a red polo shirt and khaki pants, delivering food to people who rarely looked him in the eye. His motorcycle was parked outside, a practical Honda with insulated delivery bags strapped to the back. Nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. Vincent had learned long ago that invisibility was often the most valuable asset a person could have. To the customers on his route, Vincent was part of the city's infrastructure, as unremarkable as traffic lights or mailboxes. They ordered their food, took their pizzas, tipped without thinking, and closed their doors without ever wondering about the man who had brought them dinner. But Vincent saw everything. During his deliveries, he noticed which apartments had new security systems, which businesses stayed open unusually late, which cars appeared in neighborhoods where they didn't belong. He had developed an instinct for reading people in situations that went far beyond food delivery, though he kept his observations to himself unless absolutely necessary. What they didn't know, what nobody in the city knew, was that Vincent had once tracked very different kinds of targets through very different kinds of territory, that his calm, methodical approach to delivery routes came from years of surveillance operations where one mistake meant blown covers and dead agents, that he had protected America's interests with skills that most people only saw in movies. 6 miles across the city, Sarah Corelli stood in the conference room of Mitchell, Harrison & Associates, one of Philadelphia's most prestigious law firms. At 29, she was the youngest associate to make partner track in the firm's history, and she had earned her position through brilliant legal work and relentless determination. But there was one aspect of her background that she worked hard to keep separate from her professional life. "Excellent work on the Castellano case," announced Richard Harrison, the firm's senior partner, as he addressed the weekly strategy meeting. Sarah's cross-examination of their key witness was devastating, absolutely textbook impeachment. Sarah felt a flush of pride as her colleagues nodded approvingly. The Castellano case was a high-profile federal prosecution, organized crime, racketeering, money laundering, the kind of case that made careers and established reputations. "Which brings us to our next challenge," Harrison continued, his expression becoming more serious. "The defense is getting desperate. Vincent Castellano's attorney is playing every card he has, including some that might be considered intimidation tactics." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She'd noticed the hostile stares during court proceedings, the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached, the sense that she was being watched and evaluated by people whose intentions were far from benign. "Nothing overt," Harrison added quickly. "Nothing we can prove. But I want everyone to be careful. This isn't just about legal strategy anymore. We're dealing with people who have a history of making problems disappear." After the meeting, Sarah found herself walking through the firm's marble-floored lobby, her mind racing with the implications of Harrison's warning. She had always known that prosecuting organized crime cases came with risks, but the reality of being personally targeted was more unsettling than she'd expected. That's when she saw her father. Vincent was standing at the reception desk, holding 2 pizza boxes and waiting patiently while the receptionist finished a phone call. He wore his usual delivery uniform, his graying hair neatly combed, his posture straight but unremarkable. Sarah felt the familiar mixture of love and embarrassment that always accompanied these encounters. She loved her father fiercely, respected his work ethic and the sacrifices he'd made to put her through law school. But in moments like these, surrounded by colleagues from elite backgrounds, she sometimes wished his work was less visible. Sarah, Vincent's face lit up when he saw her, the kind of warm smile that had greeted her after every difficult day since childhood. "I brought lunch for you and your team, extra cheese, just like you like it." "Thanks, Dad," Sarah said, accepting the boxes while glancing around to see if any of her colleagues were watching. "You didn't have to make a special trip. It's on my route anyway," Vincent said, but Sarah could see the pride in his eyes. He enjoyed being able to contribute to her success, even in small ways. They were interrupted by the sound of expensive shoes clicking across the marble floor. Richard Harrison approached with his usual air of authority, his expression curious as he took in the scene. "Sarah," Harrison said, his tone carrying that particular note of condescension that suggested he was about to say something he considered witty. "Is this your pizza delivery man?" "This is my father," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. Harrison's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Your father? How interesting." He looked Vincent up and down with barely concealed amusement. "So this is where you get your work ethic. Very admirable, very salt of the earth." Vincent nodded politely, but Sarah noticed the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested he understood exactly what Harrison was implying. "Well," Harrison continued, clearly enjoying himself, "I suppose it explains your drive to succeed. Nothing like humble beginnings to motivate excellence, right?" The casual cruelty was delivered with a smile, but it hit Sarah like a physical blow. She could see other associates gathering nearby, drawn by the entertainment value of watching the star prosecutor's embarrassing family moment. "Dad, I should get back to work," Sarah said quietly, hoping to end the encounter before Harrison could inflict more damage. But Vincent was studying Harrison with the kind of careful attention that seemed oddly intense for a pizza delivery man. "You're the senior partner," Vincent said, and Sarah noticed his voice had taken on a quality she'd never heard before, calm, but with an undercurrent of something that made her look at him twice. "That's right," Harrison replied, puffing up with self-importance. "Richard Harrison. I've been practicing law for 30 years, and Sarah's working the Castellano case," Vincent said. It wasn't a question. Harrison's expression shifted slightly. "Yes, she is. High-profile federal prosecution. Very dangerous people." "Dangerous how?" Vincent asked, and Sarah realized her father's questions weren't casual small talk. They were precise, purposeful, methodical. Harrison laughed uncomfortably. "Oh, you know, organized crime figures don't like being prosecuted. Sometimes they make their displeasure known." "What kind of displeasure?" The question hung in the air with unexpected weight. Harrison's amusement was beginning to fade, replaced by something that looked like uncertainty. "Well, nothing specific," Harrison said. "Just pressure tactics, legal intimidation." Vincent nodded slowly, but Sarah could see him processing information in a way that seemed far more sophisticated than she would have expected from someone whose biggest concern should be traffic routes and delivery times. "Mr. Harrison," Vincent said, his tone remaining conversational, "has anyone made direct threats against Sarah?" "Not exactly threats," Harrison admitted, "more like implications, suggestions about what might happen to people who interfere with their business." Sarah watched this exchange with growing fascination. Her father was asking the kind of questions that showed an understanding of criminal behavior patterns that seemed oddly professional. "What kind of implications?" Vincent pressed. Harrison was beginning to look uncomfortable with the intensity of the questioning. "Look, Mr. Corelli, is it? I appreciate your concern for your daughter, but this is really a matter for law enforcement professionals." Vincent's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted minors, a subtle straightening that suggested controlled tension. "Of course," Vincent said mildly, "I'm just a pizza delivery guy. What would I know about law enforcement?" But as he turned to leave, Vincent placed his hand gently on Sarah's shoulder and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. "Be careful, sweetheart, and if anything unusual happens, anything at all, you call me immediately." There was something in his voice that made Sarah look at him more carefully. Not the concern of an overprotective father, but the alert attention of someone who understood danger in ways she was only beginning to recognize. That evening, Sarah worked late in her office, reviewing case files and preparing for the next day's proceedings. The building was mostly empty, just a few security guards and the cleaning crew making their rounds. She was deep in concentration when her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Pretty lawyers should be more careful walking to their cars alone at night." Sarah stared at the message, her heart rate immediately spiking. She looked around her office, suddenly aware of how isolated she was, how many windows faced the street, how easy it would be for someone to watch her movements. Another message arrived. "Your father makes good pizza. Would hate for something to happen to his delivery route." This time Sarah's blood ran cold. They weren't just threatening her, they were threatening her father. The same man who had worked extra shifts to pay for her law school, who delivered food to her office just to see her smile, who had no idea that his daughter's legal career had put him in the crosshairs of dangerous people. Sarah's hands were shaking as she reached for her phone to call her father, but before she could dial, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her office, slow, deliberate footsteps that stopped right outside her door. Sarah held her breath, listening to the silence that followed. Then came a soft knock. "Miss Corelli?" The voice was unfamiliar.
male with an accent she couldn't immediately place. "I'd like to speak with you about your case." Sarah's mind raced. It was nearly 10 p.m. The building's security should have prevented anyone unauthorized from reaching the upper floors, but somehow someone had gotten through. "The building is closed," Sarah called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "You'll need to make an appointment during business hours." "I think you'll want to hear what I have to say," the voice replied. "It's about your family's safety." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. She was alone, isolated, with no immediate way to call for help without alerting whoever was outside her door. That's when she heard the elevator chime down the hall. More footsteps, these ones moving with a different rhythm, faster, more purposeful. Sarah heard voices in the hallway, one familiar, one not. "Excuse me," she heard her father's voice say politely. "I'm looking for my daughter. Sarah Corelli?" "Building's closed," came the unfamiliar voice, now sounding tense. "No visitors after hours." "Oh, I'm not a visitor," Vincent replied, and Sarah could hear something in his tone that she'd never heard before, a calm authority that commanded attention. "I'm family, and I think you and I need to have a conversation." There was a moment of silence, then Sarah heard movement in the hallway. She pressed her ear to the door, trying to understand what was happening. "You seem lost," Vincent continued, his voice carrying clearly through the corridor. "This is a law office, not the kind of place where your type of business gets conducted." "My type of business?" The stranger's voice had taken on a defensive edge. "The kind that involves threatening federal prosecutors and their families," Vincent said, and Sarah felt her understanding of her father shift completely. "The kind that brings armed men to office buildings after hours." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do," Vincent replied, and Sarah could hear the smile in his voice. But it wasn't a warm smile. "You're here because Vincent Castellano's defense team is getting desperate. They sent you to deliver a message to my daughter." Sarah stared at the door in shock. How did her father know about the Castellano case? How did he know why this man was here? "Your daughter should be more careful about the cases she takes," the stranger said, his voice now carrying an unmistakable threat. "Probably," Vincent agreed, "but then again, she's always been stubborn, gets it from her mother." There was another pause, then Vincent continued, his tone becoming conversational in a way that somehow made it more menacing. "Tell me something," Vincent said. "Who sent you? Was it Castellano's lawyer directly, or did the message come through intermediaries?" "I don't have to tell you anything." "You're right," Vincent said. "You don't. But here's what's going to happen instead. You're going to leave this building, you're going to report back to whoever sent you, and you're going to tell them that Sarah Corelli is off limits." The stranger laughed, but it sounded forced. "And why would I do that?" "Because," Vincent said, and Sarah heard his voice drop to a tone she'd never heard before. Quiet, precise, and absolutely certain. "The alternative is much worse for everyone involved. You're just a pizza delivery guy. What are you going to do?" There was a long silence, then Vincent spoke again. When he did, his voice carried a quality that made Sarah's blood run cold, not because it was threatening, but because it was so calm, so professional, so utterly confident. 23 years, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Organized Crime Task Force, Undercover Operations, Witness Protection Coordination. I've put more people like your boss in federal prison than you've had hot dinners." The silence that followed was deafening. "My daughter doesn't know about my previous career," Vincent continued. "I prefer to keep my retirement quiet, but if anyone, and I mean anyone, threatens her or interferes with her work, that quiet retirement ends immediately." Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. "FBI. Her father had been FBI." "You're lying," the stranger said, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Vincent Corelli, badge number 2847, retired 2018, Vincent recited. "Specialist in long-term undercover operations against organized crime families. Currently maintaining deep cover as a civilian contractor while monitoring ongoing investigations." Another silence, longer this time. "Check it if you want," Vincent continued. "But while you're making phone calls, remember that I know exactly who you work for, I know where you live, and I know every criminal enterprise you've been connected to for the past 5 years. How could you possibly?" "Because I've been watching," Vincent said simply. Did you think the FBI just forgot about the Castellano organization after Vincent got arrested? We've been tracking every associate, every message, every attempt at witness intimidation. Sarah heard movement in the hallway, footsteps backing away from her door. "This conversation never happened," the stranger said, his voice now openly fearful. "No," Vincent agreed, "it didn't. But if my daughter receives any more threatening messages, if anyone follows her home, if so much as a suspicious car appears on her street, the next conversation will be very different." Sarah heard the elevator chime again, followed by the sound of doors closing. Then footsteps approaching her office door. "Sarah." Vincent's voice had returned to its normal, warm tone. "It's Dad. You can open the door now." Sarah's hands were shaking as she unlocked her office door. When she opened it, she saw her father standing in the hallway, still wearing his delivery uniform, looking exactly as he had when he'd brought her lunch earlier that day. But everything had changed. "Dad," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "FBI?" Vincent's expression was gentle but serious. "Can we sit down? This is going to take some explaining." They settled in Sarah's office, the city lights twinkling through the windows while Sarah tried to process what she'd just learned about the man who had raised her. 23 years, Sarah said. "You were FBI for 23 years. "I was," Vincent confirmed. "Organized crime task force. Mostly undercover work, long-term infiltration operations. And you never told me." "I never told anyone," Vincent said. "That was the point." Sarah looked at her father, really looked at him, and began to see details she'd never noticed before. The way his eyes constantly scanned rooms when he entered them, the way he positioned himself near exits, the way he seemed to know things about people that he had no reason to know. "The pizza delivery job," Sarah said slowly. "Is that real?" Vincent smiled. "It's real. I actually do deliver pizzas. But it's also perfect cover for staying mobile, observing neighborhoods, maintaining contact with ongoing investigations. You're still working cases. Consulting," Vincent said. "Retirement from the Bureau doesn't mean retirement from protecting people, especially when one of those people is my daughter." Sarah felt tears starting to form. "All these years I've been embarrassed by your job, ashamed that you weren't more successful, more important. And I let you feel that way," Vincent said gently, "because your safety was more important than your pride. But you could have told me. You could have stopped me from being ashamed." Vincent shook his head. "If I'd told you I was FBI, you would have been proud of who I used to be, not who I chose to become. And more importantly, you might have told someone. In my line of work, secrets kept you alive." Sarah thought about the stranger in the hallway, about the threats, about how quickly her father had assessed and neutralized the situation. "How did you know to come here tonight?" "I've been monitoring communications related to the Castellano case," Vincent said. "When threatening messages started being sent to prosecution team members, I knew it was time to intervene. You've been watching me." "I've been protecting you," Vincent corrected. "There's a difference." They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the revelation that had changed everything about their relationship. "What happens now?" Sarah asked finally. "Now you continue doing your job," Vincent said. "You prosecute bad people, you uphold the law, you make the world safer, and I continue making sure you can do that work without looking over your shoulder." "And the pizza delivery?" Vincent smiled. "Best cover identity I've ever had. Nobody suspects the pizza guy of being law enforcement." Sarah studied her father's face, seeing him as if for the first time, not a man who had settled for less, but someone who had chosen a different way to serve, to protect, to make a difference. "Dad," Sarah said quietly, "I'm sorry I was ashamed of you." "You weren't ashamed of me," Vincent said, echoing words she'd heard from other children in similar situations. "You were ashamed of what you thought I represented. What's the difference?" "The difference is that now you know who I really am. And you're still here, still proud to be my daughter." Sarah felt tears starting to form. "I've always been proud to be your daughter. I just didn't understand what that meant." Over the following weeks, the Castellano case proceeded without further incident. The threatening messages stopped, the hostile stares disappeared, and Sarah was able to focus on her legal work without constantly looking over her shoulder. She also began to see her father differently. Vincent continued his pizza delivery route, continued his quiet, unassuming presence in her life. But now Sarah noticed things she'd never seen before. The way he moved through the city with systematic awareness. The way he seemed to know when she was working late before she told him. The way other law enforcement officials treated him with a respect that went beyond politeness. "Your father," Richard Harrison said to her one afternoon, his tone very different from the condescension he'd shown weeks earlier, "is quite an interesting man." "How so?" Sarah asked. "I made some inquiries after that night in your office," Harrison admitted. "Vincent Corelli has quite a reputation in federal law enforcement circles. They say he's one of the best undercover operatives the Bureau ever had." Harrison paused, looking almost embarrassed. "I owe both of you an apology. I misjudged the situation completely." Sarah nodded, accepting the apology while thinking about how many people misjudged situations when they only saw the surface. That evening, Sarah found her father finishing his delivery shift, securing his motorcycle with the same care she now understood came from decades of protecting valuable assets. "Dad," Sarah said as they walked toward their cars together, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you miss it? The bureau, the investigations, being someone that people automatically respected?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, considering the question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted. There was a clarity to that work, a sense of purpose that was very immediate. "But you chose this. You chose to be ordinary. I chose to be present," Vincent corrected. "I chose to be able to protect the people I love in ways that matter more than any badge or title." Sarah looked at her father, the FBI agent who had become a pizza delivery man, the undercover operative who had chosen visibility over stealth, the federal investigator who had found a different way to serve. "You know what I realized," Sarah said. "What's that?" "You never stopped being FBI. You just changed your assignment." Vincent smiled, the kind of smile that held 23 years of dangerous investigations and 29 years of unconditional love. "That's exactly right." As they drove home separately, Sarah thought about heroes and sacrifices, about the difference between being feared and being loved. She thought about her father, who had traded a legendary career in federal law enforcement for the quiet dignity of being present for every important moment of her life. And she realized that true strength wasn't about commanding respect from criminals. It was about earning love from the people who mattered most, and being willing to be underestimated by the world if it meant being everything to someone who needed protection. Vincent Corelli had been an FBI agent, an undercover operative, whose investigations had dismantled criminal organizations and put dangerous people behind bars. But his greatest case had been performed not in back alleys or courtrooms, but in the quiet moments of everyday life, protecting his daughter while teaching her that honor wasn't about recognition, but about choosing love over legacy. Some heroes hunt criminals and carry badges, others deliver pizza and watch from the shadows, protecting in ways that no one sees, serving justice through love rather than law. Both kinds of heroes matter, but only one kind gets to drive you home after difficult days and remind you that your safety is more important than their recognition. Vincent Corelli had chosen to be that kind of hero, and in the end, that choice had made all the difference, not just for his daughter, but for everyone whose life Sarah would touch as a prosecutor, who had learned that true justice begins with understanding the value of quiet protection. The pizza delivery man's secret wasn't just that he had been FBI, it was that he had chosen presence over prestige, love over legend, and his daughter's safety over his own recognition. That's the kind of secret worth keeping, and the kind of hero worth celebrating, even if the celebration happens quietly, in the grateful heart of the child who was protected every single day.